Boker Tov. Today's daf yomi is Sanhedrin daf Samachay Sanhedrin 65. Today's daf is dedicated for a Shemir for the Chayalim. Excuse me, Hatzal for the Shuyim and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael. In the Seis Torah, so the Mishnah tells us on 65a at the top that a Baal Ov, which says that the Torah says that a Baal Ov, Rashi says, Zeh Pitom. It says the Mishnah Baal Ov is a Pitom. What's Pitom? Rashi says this is the name of a Mechashev. This week's parsha says Losiyah Mechashefa, and Rashi and the parsha says means not only are you not allowed to that not only can a Mechashefa not only have a sorceress, but also a sorcerer. So Baal Ov is a Mechashev. He's a sorcerer, necromancer, Medaber Mishechio. He speaks from his armpit. That Malas Hameis Minaras, he lifts up the dead from the ground. He puts him between his armpit, under his arm, Medaber Mishechi, and he speaks from there. So the Baal Ov, that's Pitom, Medaber Mishechio. The Yidoni, what's Yidoni? Zeh Medaber Befiv. The Gemara is going to tell us what it is, but this is one who speaks from the mouth. The Gemara is going to tell us that the Yidoni is someone who takes an animal that's not as a Yidua, and he sticks the bone in its mouth and speaks from there. Harelu B'skiwa. These get stoning. And the one who speaks gets stoning, and the one who asks the question from these people gets a regular prohibition of lashes. So the Gemara says, let's compare this to the Mishnah in Krisus, which lists those Mishnayos which you get kares for, and also you have to bring a chatas if you do it accidentally. How come in our Mishnah here mentions both the Baal Ov and the Adoni? Whereas Mishnah Gabe Krisus, why at the Mishnah Krisus the Katani Baal Ov Vishiyaro Yidoni? It only mentions the Mishnah. It only mentions in Krisus Baal Ov, but it doesn't leave behind the Adoni. So two answers to this question: Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Hol Shneim B'Lav Echad Nemru. Rabbi Yochanan says since both of them are said with one specific prohibition, the prohibition is that Al Tifnu El Alvos VeEl Yidonim. It says in the pasuk, do not turn to the Ovos and the Adonim. And so therefore, if you do both of them with one mistake, you're only going to be liable for one sin offering, because the Lavin, Mechalkin, Lechatos, because the prohibitions are Mechalek for Chatos, because Rashi says, it says, Shalota Sena, Dinus Varm, Shehem Below Sasei. And it says, V'samachle Ohu Dalav, Amachatas Alavin Kaimi. And so the Chatos comes for the Lav. Vahani Afagav Dechi even though if you do each one by itself, you're going to be liable to bring a sin offering because the lav goes on both of them. Nevertheless, it doesn't list both of them there, because if you do them with helam echad, you're only going to be liable for one sin offering, because it states there they're both included in the prohibition of lav el tifos el avos el yidonim. So okay, so that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Since they're both in one prohibition, with respect, if you do them both with one mistake, you bring one sin offering. Therefore, it doesn't list them in the Mishnah in Krisos as two separate prohibitions. Whereas Reish Lakish Omar Yidoni Lefisha Aimbo Ma'aseh. Reish Lakish says that the Yidoni is left out because there's no action associated with it. We'll see what that means in the Gemara. Mean to say that the bone is speaking or he's speaking, but there's no action associated. Rabbi Yochanan Ma'ishna Baal Ov did not. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it could mention either Baal Ov or Yidoni. Why does it mention the Baal Ov? Because the pasuk starts with it. It says Al Tifnu El Avos Ve'el Yidonim. Reish Lakish my time Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Why does Reish Lakish not accept Rabbi Yochanan's reasoning? Amar Papa Chalukin Heim B'Misa. So Rav Papa says that the reason is because they are chalukin. There is a difference between them with respect to misa, with respect to death. Meaning to say, even though that you bring they're one prohibition, and you bring one sin offering. Nevertheless, the Torah, the pasuk deals with when the pasuk deals with their death, it says ov o yidoni mosia, and then it says an ov or yidoni will be put to death. And the word o is going to make a chalukah, a distinction, that you have death for each and every one. And also, as a result of this, since there's a chiluk between them for misa, there's also going to be a chiluk between them for the sin offering. And so therefore, according to Reish Lakish, if you bring both of them with one halama, you're going to bring 2 sin offerings. And so the Mishnah and Krisos would have counted it. However, the Mishnah and Krisos do not write Yidoni because there's no chatas for it, because there's no action for it at all. So that's what Rav Papa says. They are chalukim b'misa. They would be chalukim for chatas, but there's no chatas by the Yidoni, because there's reason why there's no chatas by the Yidoni is because there's no action. Rabbi Yochanan chaluka the lav shema chaluk. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Rabbi Yochanan, what's the reason why he says that? What would he say in response to Reish Lakish? The Torah says that they distinguish them with respect to Misa. Yochanan would say chaluka the lav, when the pasuk distinguishes between them, shma chaluka. That if there's a chaluka for a lav, that's considered a distinction. The chaluka to Misa, but if there's a distinction by death, then we're going to say la ishma chaluka. That's not considered a chaluka, because that's not going to be with respect to chatas. There's only a chaluka with respect to a lav, with respect to bringing a sin offering, but not with respect to death. And so therefore, by Oven Yeduni, since the chaluka was just by Misa and not by a lav, it's not considered a chaluka. So there's one chatas if there's helam echad. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, my time will Amar Reish Lakish. Why does Rabbi Yochanan not say like Reish Lakish? Meaning to say there's no action by the Yidoni. So the Gemara says, Masnisin de Krisos Rabbi Akiva. He says because the Mishnah in Krisos is Rabbi Akiva's position. He says Lo Ba'inan Maisa. We don't need an action. Meaning to say, if Rabbi Akiva says you're liable even for lashes even without an action, and for chatas even without an action. And so that's why. And Reish Lakish says Nihidu by Rakiva Maisa Rabbi. Rabbi Akiva doesn't mean a significant action, but Maisa Zutaba. He just needs a small minor action. And so therefore, according to Rabbi Akiva, excuse me. So let's just summarize. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that Rabbi Yochanan says that since they're one prohibition, and he doesn't want to say like Reish Lakish, that because there's no action, because our Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva, who says you don't need an action. And Reish Lakish says no, even though Rabbi Akiva says you don't need an action, but a small action you need, and he would have required a sin offering, and this is a small action. So therefore, he would have required a sin offering, except for the fact that there's no action here at all. So the Gemara says, Megadev. So the Gemara says Megadev. Well, what about by the Megadev, where the Mishnah increases does list? Did you bring a chatas for this sin? My Maisika, there's no action there at all. The Megadev is somebody who does Birkas Hashem, who curses God. There's no action there. So the Gemara says there is an action. And that's why Rabbi Akiva would say that you bring the sin offering there. What's the action? Akima Sefasav, Ave Maisa. So the moving of the lips to do the Birkat Hashem is the action. Well, then the Gemara says, well, Ba'ov, my Maisa Ika. So according to the Ba'ov, what's the action by the Ba'ov? That's where the dead body speaks from his armpits. So there's Akashas Zeroasav. He flaps his armpits to get the dead body to speak, Ave Maisa. So therefore, we've established this idea. Therefore, we established this idea that there is an action. So Rabbi Akiva would say that so that's why there's no sin offering, according to Reish Lakish, by this. Welcome back, Harold. Welcome back. That's why Rabbi Akiva would. So there is an action. So Reish Lakish says Rabbi Akiva requires us, even though he doesn't require an action, he requires a little bit of an action, and so therefore there's no sin offering in this case, according to Reish Lakish, according to Rabbi Akiva. Mafilu Rabbanan. So now the Gemara asks the question: what about the mission? So we see for the mission increases that there's a dispute between the Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva only by Megadeh. That according to them, the Rabbanan say you don't bring a sin offering by Megadeh because there's no action, but by the Ov, we're in 65a, Harold. But by the case of the Ov, that the Mishnah there counts it, the sages don't have a dispute. And so therefore we see that by the ov, that is considered an action, and so you would bring a korban. So Vafil or Rabbanon are the Rabbanon even going to consider the flapping of the hands by the person who speaks underneath the dead from under his armpit? Is that considered an action? Vatanya, but didn't we learn? We learned in the Bride with respect to one who worships idolatry accidentally. Vatanya, you're only going to be liable if there's an action, can go in zibuach, kitur, nisoch, v'shtachava, like slaughtering or incense, libations, or bowing down. Who is the one who says you're only liable if you have a significant action? That's Rabbi Akiva, who is the one who says that you're liable for bowing down? That's Rabbi Akiva, who says that you're liable. You don't need an action, which means to say that the Rabbanon would say. So if Rabbi Yochanan came to Rabbanon, Rabbi Yochanan would say, even according to the Rabbanon who argue with Rabbi Akiva and require an action in order to be liable for a sin offering, nevertheless, you're going to be liable for bowing down. Why? Because just bowing down, according to the Rabbanon, is considered an action. So now we say, a question on Reish Lakish, now, according to Reish Lakish, since we see that bowing down is not considered an action, because we say that Rabbi Akiva, we learn that Mishnah like Rabbi Akiva. If that's the case, Hakashas Ross of the Ba'ov, how can you say that according to how could you say that flapping your arms by the Ba'ov is an action? He's only doing it with his hands, and it's such a small action. It's even smaller than bowing down. So the Gemara says, Kikam Reish Lakish Nami Rabbi Akiva. When Reish Lakish says that flapping your hands of the Ba'ov is considered an action, that's only according to Rabbi Akiva, but the Rabbanan say it's not. Well, if that's the case, so if you say that the sages argue with Rabbi Akiva also by Ba'ov, and they say it's not an action, and so therefore there's no sin offering, it should exclude both Megadev and Ba'ov, not just Megadev, from the position of the Rabbanan. So therefore the Gemara says, okay, the Chacham indeed agree that the Ba'ov is liable for a sin offering. So how would you say it? So the Ba'ov that's mentioned in the Mishnah in Krisos is a different than the Ba'ov that's mentioned here. The Ba'ov here is been Mekater with shade. There, the Ba'ov is where you bring an offering of incense. And so therefore, you're bringing an offering of incense to a demon who causes the dead to speak. And the burning of incense is the action. So Amrei Rava, Mekater was shade over the. That's actually idolatry. What are you talking about? That's already listed. So no, you're bringing it to you're bringing the incense to Chaver. You're not to a god, but rather you want to do this witchcraft to bring the demons to here, and that's what you're trying to do. So that's a different prohibition from the Torah. That's just that's where you're like trying to use necromancy or not necromancy, sorcery to gather together snakes or scorpions. So it's a prohibition. It's just a law. It's not a death penalty. We're not carrying. So the Gemara says, Torah Amra chover b'skila. But the Torah says by Ba'ov that chover zeh b'skila, that if you gather the animals, it's allowed, but if you gather the demons with your magic, then you're going to get skila. And so therefore, it's considered like an action. And so therefore, if you do it accidentally, the Rabbanan say you're liable for sin offering. So now the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan, chover chaver. So now we're talking about this person who uses sorcery that the Torah says is prohibited. Echad chaver gadol, whether you gather together, Rashi says, large animals, Maasef chayos behemos gedolos, or chaver katan, or you gather together small insects. In either case, we're going to say it's going to be prohibited as this prohibition of chover chaver from the Torah. And even if you gather together snakes and scorpions, so that they fight each other outside, so that they hurt each other, also that's prohibited. But if they're coming after you, you're allowed to do it. It's not idolatry; it's just sorcery. So you'd be allowed to do it if they're attacking you. That's what it says. Abaye says, Amar Abaye Hilkach. Good morning, Jeff. Boker Tov. We're on 65A at the bottom. Amar Abaye. Therefore, Abaye says Hilkach. Hayman did summit Zibura. We have the whole gang back together. Almost. Hayman did summit Zibura va'akrava. a person who connects together a bee and a scorpion as some sorcery because he wants to get them to hurt each other so that they don't attack people or to get them out of the area. Alpagav to come and kaven to always ziku, even though his intent is so that eventually they won't damage him. Also, that's prohibited. Rashi says that's where they're not running after him. But if they're actually an active threat, you're allowed to use your sorcery to get rid of the bees and the scorpions. Okay, fine. Whatever that means, because I don't even know how you would use sorcery to get a bee to attack a scorpion. So now the Gemara says, but we're not going to go into that too much because that's by a long shot not the weirdest thing on the daf that's going to be coming on our base. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan Maishna de Kafifas Komaso Rabbanan Have Maisa, Makimas Tefasa Have Maisa. Why does Rabbi Yochanan say that according to the Rabbanan, bowing down is an action? So to get a sin offering, whereas just moving your lips to curse God is not an action. Amarava Shani Megadev Holviation Belief. So the Megadev, the one who curses God, that's not considered an action because most of the matter is in the intent, not in the words, but in the intent of what you're thinking. So the Gemara asks a question, which is going to be very strange. There's going to be some Girsa issues here, so we'll just read it. Masiv Rabbi Zera on top of 65b. Yatsu, we have the case from Krisos. It says we exclude Eidim Zomamin. Shame that Eidim Zomim they don't bring Yatsu Eidim Zomim. The Eidim Zomim don't bring a sin offering because they don't bring a sin offering for their false testimony because She'ein B'hem Ma'aseh, because they don't have an action. But why? They do have an action. Why do we say they don't have an action, they only have speech. And so therefore, speech is not considered an action. But Gemara says, but why is it not considered an action? How less they believe. The Eidim Zomim, their main sin is not with their words, but with their testimony. And if the Brisa says that there's no sin offering by an Eidim Zomim because their testimony is not an action, so we see from here that has nothing to do with the intent, that the moving of the lips is not an action, even when it has nothing to do with the intent. And so therefore, so how is this different from bowing down? It's not it's not the intent, it's the moving of the lips, which we say is not an action. So why does Rabbi Yochanan say the Rabbanan say bowing down is an action and moving the lips is not an action? So the Gemara gives a different answer. Amar Rava Shani Eidim Zomim Holviation of the call. So the main sin, says Rava, of the false testimony is not the saying of the testimony, but rather that the judges hear the sound of the testimony. And so there is no action there. This is a strange answer. It's getting even stranger. The Kol Rabbi Yochanan Lav Ma'isuva Inbar. You mean to say the voice itself is not an action, but we have two examples where Rabbi Yochanan says you use your voice in a specific manner, you've considered to have done an action. So you're not allowed to muzzle an animal while it's working. And it doesn't just mean muzzling, it means even speaking to stop the animal from eating. Chosma bakol ve'iniga bakol. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chai v'Reish Lakish Amar Pater. Let's say you muzzle the animal by speaking, or you led the animal, and this is two prohibited animals, you cause them to work together with your voice. Rabbi Yochanan says that you're liable for the lashes because so we see the voice is an action. Whereas Shlokish says you're exempt. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev Akimas Pev Have Meiser. Shlokish Amar Pater Akimas Pev Have Meiser. Rabbi Yochanan says you're liable because moving the lips is an action. And so, and Reish Lakish says you're exempt because it's not an action. But anyway, we go back to our question. Well, if that's the case, why does he say that blessing God is not an action? So we see from here, he says moving the lips is an action. So the question really is, why does he say Eidim Zomamin is not an action? So, Amarava Shani Eidim Zomamin Hol V'Yeshnam B'Riya. The false witnesses it's not about them moving their lips, but it's about their seeing. The main obligation comes on the seeing, which is, of course, very, very challenging to understand because they didn't actually see anything. So that's why there's a lot of discussion about that. Maybe it's that you caused the court to see. So Moshe Feinstein discussing this. The Rif has a totally different girsa. But anyway, the point, the idea is that it's a little bit challenging why the Rabbanan say that Megade, Birkat Hashem is not an action, but bowing down is an action, and then we have a comparison with the false witness. So Tan Rabbanan, Ba'ov, what is this Ba'ov? Zamadabar Bein HaPrakim. This is somebody who causes the dead to come up and speak from between his joints, and Bein HaTzilei Yadav, or under his armpits. And what's the Yadoni? Zamaniach Etzem Yadua Befiv V'hu Medaber Me'elav. This is the person who puts the bone of the Yadua between his mouth, and then the dead speak from within it. Maimonides is, of course, Shita also says this never happened. It's just false, but they're claiming it is. Others say, no, there really is like a dark side that God allows to exist in the world, but it's prohibited. But we go on. Meisvei, so the Gemara challenges, how can we say this? That it says, Vayaka ov me'eretz koech. The people will be so downtrodden that their sound will be heard. The sound of ov will be speaking throughout the land. So it's coming from the land. My love, the mishtaki orcha. Isn't it the case that the ov is speaking from the ground and not like from between the armpit? The Gemara says no. The self v'yasav bein haprakim mishtaki. It's going to come up and speak from between the joints, and that's what it's referring to. Another question is the ov really speaking from between the joints or the armpit? But it says that when the witches of Endor, that Shaul and he was desperate, he went to the witches of Endor and he asked her to bring up Shmuel from the dead. It says, "Vatomer Ishal Shaul Elohim Ra'isi Olim and Arts." I saw here Elohim means distinguished man coming up from the ground. So doesn't it mean that he spoke from the ground? My love the Mishtayiki Orche, where it says no, the Yasef Bein HaPrakim Mishtayik. He sat between the joints and he spoke. So okay, Tana Rabbanan Ba'ov. What is the Ba'ov? Echad Hamala Bezikuro ve'Echad Hanishal Begugolas. This is person, whether he lifted up the dead and he had him speak from his dikuro, which is his male member, or it could also refer to the prohibition of somebody who asks questions from a skull of a dead person that's lying on the ground, and it causes the skull to answer. Ma bein zev is that. What's the distinction? Ma bezdikuro eino ola kedarko. That if he bring up the dead with his member, then the dead is not going to go up in a manner that the head is above and the legs are below, but rather the legs will be above, the legs will be on top. So he's going to be upside down. Ve'enu ola b'Shabbos, and he can't go up on Shabbos. So nishal b'Golgolas ola kedarko. If he's asked of the skull, then it goes up in the typical manner, the ola b'Shabbos, and it goes up on Shabbos. Ola leicha solek. Where's the skull going up? It's lying down in front of him. El ema ona kedarko ve'ona b'Shabbos. It answers properly and even on Shabbos. We have more to say on this topic in the Gemara, but I just want to say, up until nowadays, most people would say that you're a quack if you believe in like speaking to the dead, mediums. I don't want to insult anybody who believes in that, but I'm saying most people would say, be very skeptical of that. But in the 20th century, in the first part of the 20th century, it was even as late as the first part of the 20th century, it was the majority opinion. And there was a very public debate, at the beginning of the 20th century, or not so much at the beginning, but like the mid-century, between Houdini and Arthur Conan Doyle, where Arthur Conan Doyle, the famous author, tried to convince Houdini that his mother had, after Houdini's mother died, Houdini was devastated, and Arthur Conan Doyle tried to convince him that he could get a medium to bring his mother back. And Houdini was he went to the thing. Houdini was a big fan of Maimonides, and his father was a rabbi, and Bradley Fields introduced me to a scholarship on Houdini, and Houdini went to this session, and he saw it was like cheap magic tricks, and then he went to try and expose it, and he and Arthur Conan Doyle, who had been very close, became bitter enemies over this dispute. But the point is that most of the world, even though like so-called intellectuals, believe in this. So, of course, there are people do. I'm just saying, but the majority of people then in the 20th century believed in it. We have different Michigan. Rupus Harasha. Also, this question, Turnus Rupus, the wicked one, asked Rabbi Akiva. Amar Lo, he says to Rabbi Akiva, Ma yomi yomayim. Why is this day Shabbos. What's special about Shabbos? Why is it different than, let's say, a Monday or a Tuesday? Amarle, Umak Varmi Guvrin. He says, well, why are you better than any other person? Amarle Demarit Savi. I was appointed by my superior, the emperor. So he says, Shabbos Nami Demarit Sivi. So Rabbi Akiva says, Shabbos also appointed. Amarle Hachi Kaminoch. Now, this is what I was asking you. Mi Amar Da'inna Shabbos. How do you know today is the Shabbos? Amarle Nahar Sabbachin Yochil. He says, I'll prove it to you from the Sabbachin River that the whole day it washes out stones in normal manner. Whereas on Shabbos, it's very quiet. So he says, well, Ba'ov Yochiach, and also Ba'ov will prove it. Why? Because every day it comes up, but on Shabbos, the Ba'ov can't bring it up. And then he says, a zinger, V'kivro Shalaviv Yochiach, and your father's grave will prove it. Shein Mala Hashem Shabbos, because he's in hell, and it smokes every day, but on the Shabbos, you can't make a fire. So the fire of Ganem stops. So your father's grave starts smoking on Shabbos. He says, you embarrassed, you cursed, and you despised my father when you said he's in Gehenna. So he says, Shoel Ov, Hainu Dorish Al Mesim. So it says in the pasuk, you cannot find the Chover Chaver or Shoel Ov, the Dorish Al Mesim. Well, Shoel Ov is the same thing as asking the dead. So the Gemara says, no, Dorish Mesim Kedetanya, Dorish El Mesim. What is Dorish Al Mesim? There's a person who starves himself and sleeps in the cemetery so he can get the Ruach HaTumah, the impure spirituality, so that the demon of the cemetery will like him and help him with his magic. When Rabbi Akiva would come to this pasuk, he would cry. This appears several times in the Shas. Rabbi Akiva would cry when he comes to a pasuk, and he would say, just like somebody who starves himself so that the Ruach Tumah can descend upon him, he'll get the Ruach Tumah. And Maravat with somebody who fasts. Wants the Ruach Tahara to come upon him. How much more so will he be getting it? But what can I do that we don't get it? Because our sins have caused us. Your sins separate you from God. So Amarava, Ibau Tzadika, Baru Alma. So Rava says, if the Tzadikim would want and would only purify themselves, they would be able to create entire worlds. And it says, but it's your sins that separate you from God. Rava, so now we have very famous teaching. Rava Baragavra. Rava was able to create a person. That's how Rashi says it. Rabbeinu Hananel says he just did it with illusions. He didn't actually create a person. Rashi says he actually created a person. Rabbeinu Hananel says he did this to just show how these magicians use cheap illusions. The Rama rejects that. The Rama rejects that approach. But he says Rava created a man. Rashi says he took the Sefer Yetzirah, which is an ancient Kabbalistic work, and he was able to taught him how to combine certain letters in the alphabet to make God's name and to create this man. Shadra made the Rebbe Zera, so he sent this person to Rebbe Zera. Rebbe Zera was talking to him. He didn't answer him. Amarway min chavraya. So Rebbe Zera says to that man, "You are somebody who's obviously just created by one of the sages. Go back to your dirt." Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Oshaya have a Yasser Komal Shabbat of asking Sefer Yetzirah. Chanina and Oshaya, they were every Erev Shabbos studying this mystical work Sefer Yetzirah. Umibru Wahu Iglotalta, and through this Sefer Yetzirah, they created an Iglotalta. The Sefer Yetzirah was the work in which the world was created from mystically. So therefore, they created a calf, a very large calf, as though it was basically fully grown, like in a third of its years, and they ate it. So we learn a lot of things from this. First of all, we can learn the first story of Rava. Some people say like this is the origin story for the Golem of the Maharal of Prague. But to my mind, it's relevant because we see how did he know it wasn't human? Because it wasn't able to speak. Speech represents personality. So we have with AI, we could create forms and structures that function and operate like a human being. But the difference between the man and the machine is personality, is soul. The AI, I don't believe will ever be able to create a soul. I mean, you could argue with me, but I think that's the distinction. It can't create a soul. The soul is what distinguishes us. The second thing, we see that they were able to create from magic, they were able to create a calf and they ate it. And that's where we are also today. We could create a calf in a laboratory. And we see from here that it could be kosher. What? Well, that probably they did, but I'm not sure. It seems like they considered it a regular animal. They considered it a regular animal. So even though they're not allowed to do magic, this didn't fall into the category of magic. Like I said, this stuff, is so beautiful. There's a lot of things that are challenging, and we have to look deeper and deeper into it. But we'll stop here for our discussion. Yeshikoach. Yeshikoach.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, wait, I want to say